Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good evening, everyone. 31, 7 o'clock. Thanks for joining us. We have several, again, counselors joining us telephonically as well. And so we will get started by taking our roll, please.
Council members Kiley. Nitzert.
Here.
Here.
That was Kylie is here.
Kiley here. Selberg.
Here.
Sale.
Here.
Starr.
Here.
Staley.
Here.
Brecky.
Here.
Erickson.
Here.
All right. So we have all 8 city councilors here. We'll rise and say our Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice
for all. All right, we'll get started by looking at item 3, which is our consent agenda. And for any changes on that, Councilor Nitzert?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would like to pull item number 1, which is Fire Station number 12, and item 37 from contracts agreements, which is the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation Agreement for the One Sioux Falls Fund. And I'd also like to, item 37, to be considered after item number 6 on the regular agenda, if possible.
Okay.
So pull 2 items and just put item number 37 after item number 6.
Got it. All right. Any other changes, council?
Move approval on the agenda.
Second, Nitzert.
All right. Motion approved by Councilor Selberg, seconded by Councilor Nitzert. Any discussion? We'll take a vote, please.
Council members Kiley.
Yes.
Nitzert.
Yes.
Selberg.
Yes.
Sale.
Yes.
Starr.
Yes.
Staley.
Yes.
Brecky.
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
All right, that item passes 8-0. We'll move on to item 5, which is our regular agenda. Look for a motion on that.
Move approval.
Second, Sale.
All right, motion approved by Councilor Selberg, seconded by Councilor Sale. Any discussion, council? Okay, we'll take a vote on that, please.
Council members Kiley.
Yes.
Nitzert.
Yes.
Selberg.
Yes.
Sale.
Yes.
Starr. Yes. Staley.
Yes.
Brecky.
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
All right, that item passes 8-0. We'll move on then to item 1, which was pulled from our consent agenda. And Councilor Nitzert, you have the floor to begin since you pulled that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could have Director Pritchett come up, I have just a few questions. This is in regards to the fire station contract. Specifically, could you address the need, the timing, and why it's important to move forward now, and also talk about the sales and use tax fund, our capital fund, and its condition given the current economic circumstances?
Certainly. I do have a couple of slides, one of them coming from the prior presentation of this. So just kind of a little bit of history on this. Back in February and early March, which seems a little bit like an eternity ago at this point, we did bring forward a request to allocate and appropriate $3.3 million in the capital program to fund the construction of Fire Station number 12, which would be located on Faith and 41st Street here in southeastern Sioux Falls. A couple of things just to kind of reiterate from that. So we had talked about the fact that we had a $6.4 million carry forward of available balance within the capital fund budget. In addition to that, as part of that appropriation, we had talked with you about taking $1.7 million in addition to that 6.4 and adding it to our capital fund reserve, bringing that total to $2.4 million. The fire station was one of the components for several projects that were allocated from that available balance. As far as the importance of that fire station, this is something that has been in the program for many years. We had originally, last year when we did the budget, it was pulled out of the capital program. They anticipated to be utilized within the bond. With the amount of available balance we had, we brought forward that request of $3.3 million from the available balance coming forward from 2019 to be utilized toward the construction of this fire station. It is a very key and critical project for us moving forward, particularly for those in southeastern Sioux Falls. We have seen this as a growing part of our community. We've had an increased number of calls that were related to this fire station. There's two important components in terms of timeliness, and we discussed this when we originally had this approved, but one is in terms of response times. We had on the 90th percentile for the city of Sioux Falls for fire rescue, their response time was about 6 minutes and 40 seconds. For this area of town that would be served by this new fire station, it's currently at about 8 minutes and 9 seconds, so about 1.5 minutes slower. And as we discussed at that time, every minute when you're in an emergency situation is an important minute for those that are involved. So there's greatly a human aspect to the importance of moving this forward. There's also a financial aspect to this as well. The important thing of trying to move this toward construction so it can be completed in the spring of 2021. We would anticipate having additional firefighters coming on at that point. But an important piece of that is the ISO rating, which we've talked about here with the council in the past. Maintaining, we have the highest level of ISO rating in the city. We expect an on-site visit from those that make those ISO ratings, and having that ISO rating creates savings for all of our homeowners throughout the city. So this has impact on that in terms of reducing their insurance costs for those homeowners. The second slide I will show you is just kind of a quick summary of this particular bid. As I said, we had an original budget for this project of $3.3 million. The construction portion of that budget was $2.8 million. So the difference of that is there was about a $430,000 allowance in addition to construction for things like design fees, fitting the facility out from a technology perspective, as well as for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So that is in addition to the construction amount. This is a highly competitive project. We had 10 bidders that came in for it. Those bids ranged from $2.6 million to $3.1 million, so they were all pretty tight. But the lowest bidder was Hugendorn Construction, and that's who we're recommending awarding this bid to. And again, that is for $2.6 million. As far as some of your questions about where we're at with the sales tax fund. So this is being funded by the sales and use tax fund. It is something that we have given a lot of thought to over the last week or two as we've been in a very fluid situation, and certainly we've seen the impacts economically. So one of the first funds that we were looking at is that sales and use tax fund, because it is primarily funded by the sales, second penny sales tax. We don't receive property taxes or utilize that towards the use of capital projects. And sales and use tax happens to be a lot more volatile, especially as economic conditions change. And so we've been looking at that very carefully as it is in regard to what our impact will be for 2020. A couple of things as we've been weighing this. So the first thing I would want to reiterate is this. We had a very strong 2019. And we actually, the first few months of this year also came in very strong. We were up about 7.4% year to date through February. So we have the benefit of a couple of good months coming into the economic climate that we find ourselves currently. So we are in that process of assessing what the impact is. So we needed to grow sales taxes by 1.5% in 2020 to meet our budget. And the reason why it's only 1.5% when originally we were in kind of that 3% range is because we came in so strong in 2019, so we only had to grow another 1.5% above that. But even the 1.5% in this climate seems very optimistic from an annual perspective. So what we're looking at is what happens on various backtracking of that sales taxes. So the first thing we look at is, okay, what are we able to look at for savings that doesn't affect capital projects that we are already anticipating moving forward? There's two areas that we have looked at. The first is the reserve that we set aside, and that again is that $2.4 million. So we've kind of said, okay, what if we take that first $1.4 million from that reserve, and that's sort of a hedge against our sales tax reductions. We keep the $1 million as we continue to watch this fluid economic situation. The other piece that we can look at is we had programmed in $1.6 million of debt service payments for the upcoming bond, anticipating it throughout the year. Now, depending on the timing of moving forward with that bond, if it's moved forward at the end of the year and we don't have any debt service payments this year, that's $1.6 million in the capital program that we haven't currently allocated, but was budgeted. So collectively, that brings us to about $3 million. What that essentially equates to is essentially, hypothetically, a 5% annualized reduction in sales taxes over 2019. So if we looked at those two without cutting any capital program projects at this point, allows us to, I guess, absorb up to a 5% reduction. Then we started looking at what a 10% reduction looks like. What does a 15% reduction looks like? What does a 20% reduction look like? To give you a little bit of a comparison, in 2009, we experienced about a 5.8% reduction in sales taxes for that growth for that year. That was after the Great Recession. So we're still in that time frame of trying to figure out how this relates to that particular one, but we have much different circumstances in regard to the economic climate we're in, from going from about 90 miles an hour to 5 miles an hour. It's a much different scenario. So how do you get from 5% anticipated reduction of sales taxes to a 10% reduction of sales taxes? That equates to about a $3 million holdback of capital projects. Over the course of the last 2 days, we've been meeting with our Parks Department director. We've met with our staff and Director Cotter from Streets and Highways and Streets, and they are a bulk of our capital program as it relates to the sales and use tax fund. And we have identified, working with them, about $8.5 million of projects that we have not yet bid, and we are putting on a temporary hold as we continue to assess the situation. So again, you can kind of go back and figure out what $8.5 million translates into in it's actually about $3.4 million for every 5% reduction. We also believe that there's at least another $1 million we can look to set aside from other areas, whether those are on our OSEP or equipment side or from other departments. So we have an ability to adapt here. We're going to be continuing to meet every 2 to 3 weeks as to continue to assess the situation, but we do have the capability to absorb, to set aside, to stay some of the projects. This is an important project that we would like to see move forward, but there are others that we have that we can kind of set aside for now as we continue to assess that situation. Now, when I say that $8.5 million or $9 million worth of projects, that could equate to an 18 to 20% reduction in sales taxes on an annualized basis. But we already have growth in the first 2 months of 7.4%. So what that kind of models out to is it's almost as deep as a 40% reduction of sales taxes during 5 months of the year as we slide into a 40% reduction and hopefully slide out toward the end of the year. So we are talking about what could be considerably deep reductions in sales tax revenues and that we're working to absorb. In terms of when we'll start seeing the hard data on what the true impacts are, it's going to be several months before we start to see that. So in the next week, we should have the March sales tax numbers available to share with you. And hopefully when we come back on April 7th to provide the end of year presentation, we'll be able to talk a little bit about what March numbers may look like. We don't expect much movement on the March numbers because they relate primarily to the February sales tax collection because we're always a month in arrears. So the first expectation of some impact that we might see might be not until early May when we get the April sales tax numbers in. When we really think we'll begin to see it will be in those in early June when we get the May numbers that came from April. So there's this kind of lag effect that we have, but so it's going to be a couple of months before we really see the full impact of what this is in terms of hard data.
Thank you for the very detailed answer, and that's what I was looking for. And as you know, I've been talking to the administration really about, my personal life. I'm staying liquid and not expending funds that I really, really don't have to. And that's what I want to see here is until we see what's going to happen, that we're looking at each project and asking, do we really, really need to do it, or could we wait on it? And there could be some tough choices, and there's some compelling reasons here, but I think everything has to be on the table and be very aggressive because we don't know how long this is going to drag out. So thank you for that.
Before we ask for any questions of Sean, I'm going to see if there's anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item tonight.
Tim Stanga. This was sort of brought up a couple meetings ago about the sewer treatment plant, on what's going on right now. Should we slow it down a little bit to see what we should do on the sewer treatment plant? But you know, it was shut down because everybody thinks that everything's going to be great, hunky-dory. This is a need. This is something that that neighborhood does need. What we did was we put our wants in front of our needs. We put our toys in front of our needs. Instead of investing 5 to 10 years ago into a sewer treatment plant, we went after our needs, our little toys. What are our toys making us today? Event center, closed, bad siding. City Hall, closed, bad heating and cooling system. Swimming pool, closed, not making us a dime, bad windows. Parking ramp, citizens had to put down money for a parking ramp. The investors didn't have to put a dime. Where are we putting the citizens' needs at? We go after all of our toys. And it was brought up that if we were doing a baseball field, we'd change what we were doing. We'd look at it a little bit different. No, we've already got them toys. People, wake up. Sioux Falls has to wake up. They have to see what the city council is doing to the citizens of Sioux Falls. They're draining them. I was hoping for a day like this that we would really have to sit back and really have to count our pennies to figure out how this city would do it if they really hit rock bottom. I really want to see all the stuff that has been cut, or what they're looking at cutting, to be able to do the fire station. The fire station is a need. But I also want to look at the $8 million that they're going to hold off on doing road projects and other projects in town. I want to see them first. So really and truthfully, if this is going to be voted on, I'd like to see it deferred. I think the citizens should be able to see what projects we're putting on hold, what projects we're putting back, because our roads suck. And if you guys can stand here and say that they're great roads, terrible.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak on this tonight? All right, now we can move into some conversation that's productive with Sean. If there's any questions for Sean.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Staley.
Thank you. Sean, you opened the door here to this broader conversation about sales tax revenue, and I believe you're giving us an update next week. Is that correct? That's correct. So I'm going to ask when I'm done with this next question, but after that, Mr. Stanga brings up a good point that I've considered, and I know Councilor Sale wanted to know if I was going to support this earlier this week. And what I need to have is someone to tell the public why we can't put this on hold. Because to me, it would have made sense to say, let's not go forward with anything. And I know I said that about our contract with the waste treatment plant. I mean, I've been saying it as we're coming into this wave of affliction, really is what it is. We don't know where the end of it's going to be. So I'm going to ask someone to come forward and explain to the public the urgency of passing this tonight. Okay, because I agree it is an important safety project for our city. But next week, when you come forward, and I love, Sean, and I'm going to quote you on this, I love what you said, 90 miles an hour, which is what we've been running for many years now, and now you said we're going 5 miles per hour. Thank you for being upfront and honest with that. Next week when you come in, I would like to see one of those pie charts that you bring forward so beautifully, and so that the citizens understand what our second penny is all about, They understand about the $119 million that we need to hold up the employees' salaries out of the first penny and the operational, the general fund. And then I also want you to show us what we are needing for our parking enterprise fund. Because we got people, we're getting money from the downtown meters that, of course, aren't being used, and we also have the parking leases, and we have a bond payment for that parking ramp that is tied to the second penny if it can't be made. So all of those, I think, should all be laid out in very easily understood terms. Does that make sense? That's my request. And so if you would just explain, if you do or someone from the fire department wants to explain the urgency that we pass this now at this time.
Firstly, the urgency is being able to award the bid, so we can't delay any further in awarding it. Otherwise, we can't, in terms of the time frame, award the bids that have already been opened. So tonight, we have to move this forward, or we will have to reject all bids, just from a procedural standpoint. In terms of a need standpoint, I would reflect back to the fact that I think if anything brings certain awareness over the last several weeks, it's the importance of public safety to our community. And response times is going to be a big part of that. And that's a key reason for moving this project forward, is because we need to be able to adhere to our commitment to the citizens of this community, that we maintain low response times across the entire community, in addition to the fact that those response times will be directly reflected in our ISO rating. And if we don't move forward with it now, when they do our on-site visit, we could be in jeopardy of degrading or downgrading our ISO rating, which will cause insurance rates potentially for citizens of this community to go up.
But so you use the word could. So if we waited 4 months and put this out for bid again, there's a good chance the same companies would want to bid for the work.
There's a
right?
possibility of
Yeah.
that, but we would be in, first of all, we have a certain cadet class that would be coming through that would be ready to staff this particular location. Secondly, we would be in jeopardy because we don't necessarily control when those on-site reviews are done for ISO ratings to jeopardize when that occurs. So building this now, we start now so that it can be built by the spring and opened in the spring of 2021.
I understand. I would think that the people who do the ratings would probably give a little latitude to.
If it's not built when they visit, it will not be counted.
Even in the midst of our pandemic situation?
I can't speak for them, but they have taken a very conservative approach in this. If it's not built, they cannot count that it's going to be built.
I'm going to let Councilor Sale jump in and speak to that, because I believe he might be able to address that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Staley, I can speak a little bit to the ISO rating, having been there before. No, it's as the date they do the inspections and do that. When the city of Sioux Falls and fire department went to an ISO class 1, which is the best there is in the country, at that time, it was several years ago, that they estimated that it was a $3 million savings in insurance premiums to the citizens and businesses of Sioux Falls. And it's very rare to have that. There's 37 or 38 in the whole United States that is certified to the level of our fire department and that has the ISO 1 rating. So we are elite at that point. If this fire station is pushed back beyond the time that they believe that they will have a recertification, so there's a time limit on it, and at that time they have to recertify and get the re-rating. If this is pushed back beyond that and we drop back an ISO rating, that will cost potentially the citizens and businesses of Sioux Falls millions of dollars in premiums. I know, I see that, I rate these things, I know how that works when you put it into the gee whiz machine that comes up with your premium. And as far as that goes, I'll dovetail on what Mr. Pritchard said. We owe it to this part of the city to have the same service as the rest of the parts of the city. So that's why it's imperative. That's why it's been in planning for years and years and years. As this city grows, as there's schools going out there, it's very important that we do that. The timing of this has to be tonight, based on when the bids are and when the construction will be complete and when it can be staffed, so it's viral. And tonight we saw we had 100% of the public input supporting it, so I think it's imperative. To me, it's a slam dunk because I grew up in the fire station. So hopefully that can clear a few things up.
Other questions for Sean? Counselor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Director Pritchett, for that thorough breakdown on the project. I appreciate that. First question, if I'm not mistaken, has this not been delayed a couple of times, this project, up till now? Has it not come up a couple?
It has been pushed back a few years, from my understanding, yes.
That's my understanding as well. So my understanding that we're well under budget. What was the total that we came in under? Is it somewhere between 200 to 500? What was the number?
We're about $200,000 under budget.
Okay,
presently.
that's good news. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as times as they are, we have to scrutinize every dime that goes out, and especially when we talk about numbers such as these, but I can't think of anything that's more overdue as far as in this particular area. It's overdue, it's something the city needs. Obviously, when projects like this come up, especially in the next few months to a year, everything's gonna get scrutinized, but I will be wholeheartedly supporting this tonight because I think it's time. So anyways, I appreciate your
Any counselors on the,
breakdown.
sorry about that, Counselor. Any counselors on the phone wish to speak?
Yes, Rick. This is Christine.
Counselor Erickson, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the detailed information, Director Pritchett, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me on the phone too and answer a few questions that I had. In my opinion, if we're going to push anything off, this is not something that we push off. It's not something in the name of public safety that is a fun to have item. I feel like there's other items that as we make the list and all departments look at the list and see what items need to potentially be delayed for the time being, this certainly is not one of them. The last thing we need are delayed response times when I'm expecting the fire or whomever to come to my place in need if it's in that area. And so I would just hope that we can all support this in the name of public safety. Thank you.
Counselor Kiley, I believe you said something as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is something that is needed badly in the southeast part of the city, and it has been delayed several times already. So further delay is just going to further add to some of the issues that have already been discussed regarding the response times and jeopardizing our ISO rating. Many, if not most, of the decisions we've made these past several weeks have been about public safety and health, and this is one that is equally important too. As been mentioned, when people call the fire department, we expect them to get there in a very timely fashion. Those response times have increased because of the distance traveled between the new part of the city in the southeast and the existing fire station. And in delaying this does jeopardize the ISO rating, as Councilor Sale had mentioned. It's going to be based on the time of that they are in conducting their review of our fire department. So we don't want to just hope that they would consider today's environment as it relates to COVID-19. It's come in almost $250,000 under budget now. If we delay it, it's going to be delayed back another year, which will most likely add at least another 3% to construction costs, if not more, considering we don't know what's going to happen to the cost of construction materials in the coming months. So I would not support deferring this item, and I will be voting yes, fully intend to vote yes on this. Thank you.
Anyone want to make a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor?
Counselor Brecky, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a few words. I think for the public, it might be strange for them to think that we would be spending money on anything right now, that everything would have to have the brakes put on. However, even in this time of crisis, and there will be some financial repercussions, we know for sure, and they will be serious, I think it's all about priorities. And I would actually, say that, I agreed with the public input. You know, we have spent a lot of money on extras, but that's what this administration, you know, has been committed to since they came on board. You know, Mayor, I remember you talking to me and saying, I'm kind of not about the glamour. I'm going to be about just good, solid government and, you know, good services. And I think that's the pendulum swinging back now. And regardless of what is happening with the coronavirus, this administration and this group of council members are going to be responsible for the needs, and because the wants are kind of have already been built. And I think those include the fire station and the water reclamation plant. And if I was told to set my priorities right now, you know, at this moment for what are the most important things we have to move forward with, and then we have to figure out where the other cuts shall come. For me, it would be the water reclamation plant and the fire station. And so I'm going to be voting for it, even though, again, I think to the public, it's just like, how can they spend money on anything? Well, I think it's going to be really important going forward as a government that we do. And it will be, however, it will be a matter of prioritization, and surely there will be some rebudgeting and some deep cuts, but these are not two things that I think we would want to do that on. So I will be voting for moving forward on the fire station.
All right, thank you, Councilor. Anyone want to make a motion or any other comments?
No,
Councilor
I want to make a quick comment if I can, Mr. Mayor. My feeling on this, I agree with what Councilor Brecky was saying there. And I'm so glad we pulled this out of a potential bond or borrowing the money. Tonight, we're still able to pay cash for this. That saves the citizens more than $1 million in interest. It's been kicked back in the capital plan for years for whatever reasons. We know what the reasons are. I shouldn't say that we don't know, but because we had other priorities. But when this was suggested that we bond for this facility and borrow the money, and we've never borrowed the money for these type of facilities, we've paid cash. I'm supporting this because we're paying for it with cash that we have. It's in the bank already, and we're going to write checks right out of our account. So we're not borrowing money. If we were here tonight with a large bond issue and tried to roll this into a bond, I would object. But this is good, solid government to pay cash for the needs that we have.
Thank you, Councilor. All right, there's a motion approved by Councilor Selberg on this. I got a second?
Second, Sale.
Seconded by Councilor Sale. Any further discussion on the council? All right, we'll take a vote on this, please.
Council members Kiley,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley,
Yes.
Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
All right, that item passes 8-0. We'll move on to item number 6, please.
Item 6, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, providing supplemental emergency appropriations for housing. This ordinance shall become effective upon one reading and adoption pursuant to Section 33.027 of the Code of Ordinances of Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Good evening, Jeff. Great hygiene, my friend. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, councilors. Thank you for your time tonight. This is really kind of a bittersweet thing to bring before you, the fact that you'll hear the needs out there because of the virus are pretty dire for some of these people. And this fund is a way to keep them housed, and it's a public safety issue. It really is, because if these people become unhoused, and some of our shelters are already seeing increased numbers, and if all of a sudden the virus gets loose because they couldn't distance in a shelter, and we have 100 folks without shelter, it's a dire issue. So it's bittersweet, but I couldn't be more proud of the administration, the other departments, the city staff, city attorneys, the donors to this fund, and certainly to the community partners behind me that you'll get to hear from in just a second. This fund was just a concept a couple weeks ago. It got stood up very quickly. I think we had a conversation on a Monday. On Tuesday, the mayor made an announcement with $500,000 of private money into this fund. But this was led by the mayor's efforts, the city's efforts, with $250,000 out of the housing fund. Funds that were already there, that already had spending authority, that we were using for different projects that we dedicated to this, to get the fund started, to leverage that and get the pipeline started for private donations, businesses that stepped up immediately. So currently the fund stands at about 136 million. And Andy Patterson is here with the Community Foundation. If you have questions about the fund, you can talk about that. There's been 130 donors to date. 33 of those are businesses, and 97 of them are individuals who have made $100, $250 donations, people giving where they can. We will talk tonight about the process. There are two parts to it, of course. There's the agreement with the Community Foundation. In addition to the $250,000 that's already committed. So understand, we were coming to this meeting tonight no matter what, because we needed to approve the contract for that $250 to the Community Foundation. So we were going to be here either way. And now at the mayor's request, we were asking for another $750,000 out of unobligated funds to make it a full $1 million into this fund to the Community Foundation. So that's the this is before you, and then the contract or the agreement with the Community Foundation is the second part of tonight. As I talked to some of you this week, lots of your questions, and rightfully so, and very good questions, were around the process. Who makes these decisions on who gets the funds? How do people apply? How do we make sure that the requests are legitimate? And it's been a great partnership, and as people have come alongside, in particular, the Helpline Center, who takes the applications, an online process, collects them, stood up the Unmet Needs Committee that approves them, the Community Foundation, of course, which is the repository for the donations, and then the Community Outreach, which is an organization that already provides aid to people, and they're the ones that actually cut the checks out to the landlords that receive the payments on behalf of their residents. I'm going to turn it over now to Janet Kidams, who is the CEO with the Helpline Center. There's the next, I'm sorry, go through that. And she will walk you through, there's a flow chart, there'll be the next, she'll walk you through the process of how people apply for the fund, answer questions about the committee, eligibility, and those types of things. And as I mentioned, Andy is here to talk about the fund at the Community Foundation, if you have questions for him. And then after that, Sean will come up and talk you kind of through the ordinance itself.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, Janet. Welcome.
Mayor and City Council. Janet Kidams, CEO of the Helpline Center. I'm happy to be here tonight to talk about the One Sioux Falls Fund. So I'm going to walk you through that flow chart and let you ask any questions that you have of how the process works. So an individual or household who is interested in applying for funding from the One Sioux Falls Fund can do it two ways. They can go online to the Helpline Center website and apply, or they can dial 211 and we'll complete the application over the phone. Vast majority of folks have gone online and completed the application. Second step in the process is when they fill out that online application, an automatic email is triggered and is sent to their employer, because in the application we ask for that employer's name and email address. So that email is triggered, it is sent to the employer for verification. And what we are verifying from that employer is that that person's hours or position have been cut due to the COVID-19 virus. So the employer receives that email. It says the applicant's name and that we need verification. They review that. They have the opportunity to make any comments that they want, and then they actually physically sign the verification, send it back to the Helpline Center. So now we know that that is in fact an accurate representation that that employee's hours were reduced or their job was cut because of the COVID virus. So we receive all those back, we put them in a spreadsheet, and we review the other information the applicant has given to us. In some cases, the applicant has not completed the application completely, and we have to make follow-up phone calls to get all the information so it's accurate. Once we have all that, we put it in a spreadsheet and we take it before the Unmet Needs Committee. And then the Unmet Needs Committee reviews that, asks any questions, any clarification that we need with that. And on the spreadsheet, it says exactly how much that person is requesting based upon what their rent is. We ask what their rent amount is, and the Unmet Needs Committee had met a while ago, and we decided the appropriate amount to fund would be 70% of whatever their rent is. That's the support that we're able to provide. So that goes before the Unmet Needs Committee. They ask questions. If they approve it, what they approve is the actual list of those individuals, and we know right up front what the amount of money is. So the total amount of money for that approval then is requested from the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation. That dollar amount is a check that is then sent to the community outreach. From there, what the community outreach does is on that spreadsheet is everybody's landlord, the specific landlord, and so the community outreach actually makes the check out to that specific landlord for that specific dollar amount and in reference to a specific client or applicant, so they know whose rent to credit, so to speak, with that. So where we're at in the process, we have met many, many times, the Unmet Needs Committee, but we have 398 applicants that we have approved, and that is approximately $233,000 that we have approved to out of the fund. So 277 of those applicants have already received notification from us, and the checks are on the way. The second group of those, 121, we'll be notifying them this week of the funding, and the checks hopefully will go out later this week or early next week. And the committee is meeting again tomorrow, and we have 200 more applications to review and hopefully approve, and those dollars will go out shortly as soon as we can get those moving forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the actual Unmet Needs Committee so that folks understand actually who is on that. So there's a list on the flow chart there of the agencies that are represented. And those, of course, include the City of Sioux Falls, the Community Outreach, the Empower Campus, the Helpline Center, Interlakes Community Action, Lutheran Social Services, Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, and the Sioux Empire United Way. The Unmet Needs Committee, I'm sad to say that we have been meeting quite often over the past year with the amount of disasters we've experienced in our city. So this is a finely tuned group of individuals that looks at the applications and tries to meet the needs in the best way possible. I wanted to talk a little bit about, there's an eligibility box on that flow chart, and just to emphasize that the main purpose of this fund is housing. We want to keep people housed. Originally, when we had built the application for people to apply for assistance from the fund, we requested information if it was a mortgage or if it was rent assistance that they needed. The vast majority of the applicants were rent-based and did not need mortgage assistance. So the committee met and made the determination that the dollars needed to be focused on rent assistance as opposed to mortgage assistance, and also in having conversations with several mortgage lenders and bankers in our community, they strongly encouraged us there was other opportunities to support those folks that had mortgages to get forbearances through their mortgage lender. So that's why the focus is on rent assistance at this point. And so generally speaking, somebody is eligible if they have lost their hours have been cut, lost their job because of the COVID virus. But in addition, there's a couple of caveats that I wanted to bring forward to you. We have had a couple of cases where that individual has tested positive or they've been under quarantine, meaning that they're not able to do their job. And so they have been eligible for the assistance from the fund. In addition, we've also had a couple of cases where it's been a single parent that has young children and their child care is no longer available or accessible for them. So they have to stay home to take care of that child or children, and so they've become eligible for the fund. And I talked about just the rental assistance. So that is the kind of the flow chart of how that works. I did want to just highlight a few cases just to tell you what we hear on the phones at the Helpline Center. There's a case of a single mom who filled out the application. She has 4 children at home that are dependent upon her. Her job that she did for a living, she was a substitute teacher. With the schools no longer being in session, she no longer has a job and she no longer has income to support her and her 4 children. So she was simply asking for assistance to help pay her rent. Another case would be a woman who applied to us who has been recently diagnosed with cancer. With that cancer diagnosis, she's no longer able to go into her place of work because her health would be at risk for her to do that. So she is at home, and her job does not allow her to telecommute. She cannot work from home, and so she needs assistance to pay her rent. So those are just a couple of examples of the folks that that have applied for assistance from the fund. And I will say that since we've already sent out over 277 notifications of the fund helping people, we have received so many positive emails back from folks that have just been so grateful and so thankful for the assistance. So many of these folks were honestly just terrified. They didn't know what to do. They've never been in this position before. They've never had their hours cut. They've never lost a job. And they honestly just didn't know how they were going to pay their rent. So this has been such a blessing to be able to talk with folks on the phone and offer this as assistance to them. So I just wanted to sincerely thank you for the contribution from the city's housing fund, that it truly has made a difference in hundreds of people's lives, and it potentially could be thousands of people. When I left the office before I came here, we had over 1,700 completed applications from folks. So we know there's a lot of people that are hurting out there. I think there's a couple of slides after this that just give a summary of some of the stats that we saw. 90% of the applications we've seen so far are from the city limits of Sioux Falls, and the smaller portion is from kind of the Sioux Empire area, the greater metro area. The next slide just kind of gives you a chart of the days and the submissions of the applications. The applications are still coming in steady, and now that we're publicly talking about the fund again, I know tomorrow when I go into work, we'll have a lot more applications. The next one just shows that we ask, of course, their employer or what their employment is, and you'll see that most of the folks by far have been employed in the restaurant or bar industry. That was hit probably the hardest. And the last one just shows the percentage that most of the folks were seeking assistance with rent and not with their mortgage. So thank you.
Janet, thank you for being here. Thank you for that explanation. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this item here? Please come forward. Good evening.
Thank you very much. You guys are doing a great job. I really appreciate it. So that's why I'm not here all the time. One question I'm going to ask is that when I go to the restaurants or I go to different places, you always got hand wash, handle. Can't you get an automatic? Would be better for that, for all of them, to think it over, that all the hospitals and doctor's office, some of them, the doctor's office don't have those automatic handles, since we might have to shake hands with the doctor or be close to them. We should have a automatic hand washer and nice clean soap dispensers for everybody to make it more safer. That's all I'd like to ask you about. Okay, something to think about. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that, sir. Anyone else here to speak on this item tonight? All right, I'm gonna pass the gavel to Councilor Selberg, because I'm going to open up with a couple things that I think are important to the conversation as we move into this, and I want to be able to speak to this. So, Marshall, thanks for chairing this item here. I wanted to address the CARES Act that Congress passed on Friday. So remember, Congress passed a $2 trillion piece of legislation that will provide a tremendous amount of support to families. And in some cases, some of the families that are coming to us right now will also be receiving dollars from the CARES Act. So are we double dipping, or are we providing money that the feds are already going to be providing? The answer to that is no, in that right now the needs are tremendous right now. It still is going to be several weeks before we see some of the dollars from the CARES Act trickle down to people who actually need them. Tomorrow's April 1st. A lot of folks, that's rent day. And there are some people who are literally 1 or 2 days away from eviction. In our One Sioux Falls framework, one of our 4 core tenets of that is housing and providing people housing. If you can't provide accessible, affordable housing, the number one thing you can do is try to keep people in their housing. And that's what this fund is really focused on, is keeping people in housing so that we don't see an influx in folks who now need new housing, different housing, have to use services in our community for being homeless or out of their home. The payroll protection program, part of the CARES Act, is about a $350 billion piece of that CARES Act. That program is being administered from the Secretary of the Treasury. Our bank community is going to be administering that program. I tell you, that's important to realize because our banks got a $350 billion program dropped in their lap that said, you need to help administer this now. And I share that because people are wondering, why do I have to go to work at my bank right now? Why is my bank closing down? My bank's not essential. I'm having to come. Our banks are probably one of the most critical sectors we have right now in our economy to keep things going. And so I wanted to make sure banks get the shout out that they need and deserve in this, because they have been incredible allies in this process, and we're going to be leaning heavily on our financial community. That being said, I had a discussion with Denny Sanford over the weekend, and Denny would like to match the city's $1 million contribution with another $1 million for the fund. And he has a tremendous heart. He has a tremendous heart for kids. He has a tremendous heart for people. He knows about the CARES Act. He knows what that's going to do, but he also knows that some of the needs are immediate. And so your votes tonight and your actions on this, you know, the dollars will be doubled and the impact will be doubled with the gift from Mr. Sanford, which I think is incredible for a city of our size in less than 2 weeks to have north of $3 million in a fund like this, which will be a huge sigh of relief for people in our community to hear that and know that. So I wanted to get that out there because it may drive some of the conversation and where we head with the discussion tonight on this issue. And I want to take the moment while I have the floor and I'm done to personally thank Denny. Denny reached out to me. I didn't reach out to Denny. So you need to know that's where his heart is. He reached out to me and said he wanted to do this. And I can't thank him enough for stepping up once again for our city. So Denny, if you're listening, which I hope you're not in La Jolla watching this meeting, but if you are, thank you.
Okay, move on to council discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Starr.
Yes, I didn't know, I thought Director Pritchett still had something as part of the presentation, so
You do, come on up.
I'm never going to make fun of the city attorney's office for presentations after earlier tonight, though, Director, on how long they are, but please.
I do have just a couple of house cleaning items and clarifications on the ordinance itself, so I just from that standpoint. Firstly, in the actual ordinance, so that's the first piece of what's being consideration, then the contract with the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation is the second thing that would be under your consideration tonight. If you look at the ordinance itself, you'll see it's written that it appears to be two $750,000 appropriations. Just for your awareness, what happens is we need to obligate the funds from the unobligated balance from the general fund and designate it to the community fund. Then we need to re-obligate it from the community development fund or the housing so that it can be expended and utilized toward the agreement. So that's the first point of clarification I wanted to provide. As there's a second that we're going to be making a request tonight to actually amend or have someone come forward and amend the actual ordinance that's in front of you to replace the paragraph 4, the one dealing with immediate effect. And we would be looking to replace that with the following verbiage, which is essentially immediate effect. This ordinance is hereby declared necessary and immediate for the immediate preservation for the public health and shall become effective immediately upon its passage and publication. And as far as a motion for this evening, the request we're going to have is for this to go to a motion to second reading on Tuesday, April 7th. So we'll do a first and a second reading on this, as would typically, even though it's an emergency ordinance, we'll take it to a second reading. Part of that is to allow for some additional due process. A second reason is we'll have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about impacts to the general fund, and you can take that as part of your consideration in appropriating this upon second reading if you move it to second reading this evening. The other piece of it is as far as the contract. So one might ask, should we defer the contract to next week to approval? The request is to still approve the agreement tonight, and the reason being is written into the agreement. If you look at it, if you actually read, if you look at section 6, and it was posted with the agenda here. It specifically states the funding being provided pursuant to this agreement is contingent upon city council appropriation and or existing budget authority. If the funds granted herein exceed what is appropriated or existing budget authority, this agreement shall impose no future obligation for the city. And what that essentially means is the plan for funding this $1 million agreement was $250,000 of existing budget authority that we already have from rededicating some funds through the housing or the community development fund, and $750,000 in additional appropriation. So if the agreement is approved tonight, we can move forward with that $250,000 piece of it that we already have the budget authority for. As the mayor mentioned, April 1st is tomorrow, and of course that is a key date for those renters to be able to continue to be making their rent payments and remain housed. And then we would hold off obviously on the additional $750,000 until second reading next week.
Any other counselors? Counselor Stark?
Actually, I just have throws a wrench into where I was headed with my question. So maybe I'm just trying to put these together of who I want to ask. Maybe Director Eckhoff would be the right way to at least start from where I'm headed here. First, as you're coming to the microphone, we're just working on $750,000. The $250,000 basically is already is moved out of your budget into, or in that process of making that gift to the community foundation. So we're not considering that $250,000. So what we're doing tonight is $750,000 moving forward. What out of your budget, or where are these funds coming from? What are we cutting to move these funds into this part of the process?
Within our budget, we have $500,000 approximately in sales tax funds that we would use for example, the 14th and Sneeve project, things that other developments, the habitat, those are the types of property that we're trying to leverage other developments into larger scale results for affordable housing. And that money was in reserve for another project that would come up during the year. So it would be one less project that we may be able to do, and we had that conversation, but just weighed that we felt this was so much more urgent at this time to address with those funds.
In the agreement, it talks about health, housing, and food security, but you're telling us tonight that this is just housing or rent money. Why was that included in the agreement for the food security and health?
We wanted you have to remember that this fund is not just for the city; it's other donors as well. We're not addressing food security at this time because we believe it's covered very well. We believe there's a lot of great organizations doing that. But if that need would arise and future donors to the fund wanted to see it go that way, that provision is kind of set out. But with us, at this point in time, yes, you're correct. We are addressing just housing, and that's the intent with the donation too.
And with this agreement, we could potentially in the future address those other needs.
If so desired, but yeah. But right now, especially with the money coming from the housing fund, it's focused that way.
Mm-hmm. And this was the one that I was having trouble whether you're the right person to ask or not. So bail out on me if you have to, and we'll pass the buck maybe if we have to. Why are we moving it from taxpayers to the to the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation and then to community outreach? I'm trying to figure out, because from what I can tell, community outreach is part of the process, but they're just writing the checks. Right. Isn't the Community Foundation able to do that without adding one more layer of bureaucracy into this process?
Probably going to let you, Andy or Janet answer that, but I think that the short answer, we're trying to go to people's strengths, right? And the Community Foundation understands how to collect those monies. They have the right mechanism for people to donate to. The community outreach, this is what they do. They have a mechanism in place, and it just seemed to get that fund up and operational. They went with what people's expertise was, but I'll let, is that a?
Andy Patterson, President of Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation. I believe the benefit or the strength of running this through the Community Foundation is that we can have one mechanism to give this away where we pair the private dollars with the public dollars. Regarding what looks like an excess step, the process, and I would give the Helpline Center a lot of credit for the way they built this process. They are doing a lot of the verification through the application process. From time to time, we need a nonprofit partner that does case management to really get it the last 5 yards to the individuals. Community Foundation, we're good at receiving money, managing money, making distributions. We don't have case managers. So right now, it's not really necessary, but it's that mechanism that we've used in the past for different partners to get it the final step. And so if that were to be necessary, then they would be using some of their skill sets to get that done.
Mr. Chair, if I can, one more while Andy's still here or Mr. Patterson's still here. Through this whole process, are there any fees being charged, or is 100% of the funds going directly to people who need them?
Yeah, no, the Community Foundation takes no fees anytime we do one of these disaster funds. And in fact, we're putting quite a bit of staff time into raising money for it as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Neitzer?
Yeah, I first of all want to say thank you. I was aware that the Community Foundation is waiving fees that they normally would charge for other things. And so that with that amount of money, you're talking about a lot of dollars. So thank you for that.
You bet.
I also want to thank T. Denny Sanford. You're going to reach tens of thousands of people's lives, which you have done over many years, and you've done it again, and the entire city and myself are grateful. I'm not sure if this is for you or it might be maybe for Janet, and it has to do, it's probably Janet, I think.
Okay, that's fine.
Could you tell me where your 70% number came from? How did you land on the 70% that you would provide?
So that was a conversation that we had with the committee. We started at 100%. We looked at, so how could we provide assistance to people who needed to have their rents paid? And so we looked at, okay, well, at the beginning, we have this many applicants and we have this many dollars in the fund. And we knew we weren't going to be able to do 100%, that we just couldn't do that. So then the committee members, honestly, we negotiated what we thought was going to be the best amount that could still help people, that individual person, and help the greater, as many people as possible. So that's how we came up with 70%. And it was also a figure that we ran by some landlords to kind of bounce that off to them to let them know that if this fund provided 70%, and if for some reason that renter could not provide the other 30%, is that acceptable? And of course, every landlord is different, but they said that that amount was acceptable to them. So.
Okay, thank you. How many months would this assistance continue?
When their application is approved, it's for a one-time rent assistance. So as this progresses, at this point, we've said everybody can be helped once. We need to get through everybody's application before we could say that somebody could be helped a second time.
Okay, and then finally, when you're looking at this, do you look at, do you ask the employer, was this out of their control, versus some employers may ask who may voluntarily be willing to take it? Do they have vacation time that they can take? And is a spouse factored in, for example, if there might be a highly compensated spouse that has not been laid off?
So we do not ask the employer if it was a voluntary, or we just simply verify that those hours or position were cut. That's the direct question from them. So I do not know the other extenuating circumstances. We do ask, and it's a household application. It's not just for an individual. So we do receive information on the other, if there's a spouse, what their employer is, and that is taken into consideration.
Is the total household income versus what's been cut taken into account, or do you not get to that level?
In some cases, we do have to get to that level because they're much more complicated and we have to have that conversation. A lot of these are pretty straightforward where there's just a single source of income that has been cut. But we honestly do look at everything.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of the counselors who are called in have any questions? I don't hear anything at this point. Counselor Staley, did you have one?
Yes, I have. Jeff, Mr. Eckhoff, if you come up, please. We had a conversation last Friday. I appreciate you calling and asking if I had any concerns. So you indicated last week that the average award was going to be between $800 and $900, I believe?
At the time, I believe it was $985.
So that's still standing, or is that a movable number? Well,
Getting a yes.
I guess, we're talking about 70% of their rent, right?
Correct.
So I would think a lot of these people aren't paying $900 a month for rent. That seems like I mean, then they would be paying, 900 would be 70% of their total rent?
Yes, that is correct. Unfortunately, the housing market in Sioux Falls, that is expensive for people, especially it's generally they have multiple bedrooms in their apartments. It's not just a single bedroom that they're paying for because they have a family that they're supporting.
Oh, so you haven't heard from people that would be paying like $700 a month?
No, we've heard across the board. That's an average. That dollar amount that Mr. Eckhoff gave. So when you look at the spreadsheet, we do have dollar amounts that are much on the lower end, perhaps 500 all the way up above 1,000, perhaps that might be a monthly rent.
Okay, so we're not targeting people who are on this could go to any income level person.
Yes, it's the eligibility is based upon if they've lost their income or their job based upon COVID and they're no longer able to pay their rent because of that.
Okay, so now, just a little clarification about how we're sitting with the fund. I mean, when I first heard this coming out before we talked about city money coming in, it was it 1.2 million? What was committed to start with?
1.3, I think.
Okay, that's private money. Now, the mayor did make a comment that was tapped, I believe, earlier this week. Have you?
I guess I'm not.
Yeah. Did you say that it was, and I don't know if I can talk to you,
That it was tapped?
Well, maybe that's not the words you used, but I thought you made a comment during one of the press releases that money had been utilized. You were looking for more donations.
I believe I probably made comments to the fact that $1.2 million isn't going to last very long at the rate of applications that we're getting.
Okay.
So if you have 1,600 applicants at $1,000 per, we're already in the red on that.
Okay, I was thinking at the time when you said that money had been utilized, I mean, that it was, the fund had been spent down already. So that money, but that's in pledges, is that right? Do you have that actually in hand?
I'll let Andy answer that.
So just to clarify, the 1.3 would include the original 250,000 from the city. So we have 1.1 in private contributions that have been made to the fund. Of those, $589,000 has been paid to the foundation already. And so you have about $520,000 that's outstanding from 12 businesses. And I've talked to all of them personally, and they're all committed to those contributions still.
What's going to be the deadline on that?
Haven't given them a deadline because of office staffing invoices. Some of those just went out on Friday, so I'm not surprised that some of those haven't come in yet.
Okay, so then it comes to the next part that Jeff and I talked about, is that I think is at least on the city's part of the 1 million, that I'd like to have some accounting as to, actually, like the landlords that are being reimbursed on this, and is that something that is being accounted for? If it's totally private money, then and T. Denny Sanford's money, that I don't think we have any right to ask what's going on with that. But if it's taxpayer money, then to say, these are the landlords, just to, how to protect that we don't have a conglomerate of one, maybe there's could be one rental agency that's getting all of the awards, and since they're the ones dispersing it, and it's going directly from the landlord into his pocket, so to speak. I mean, it's really helping the landlord as well, isn't it?
I think it's really helping the tenants.
Right, but it's helping the land, because if the landlord was to say to the tenant, you know, we're going to give you half price rent this month, which, is that something that we're talking about too, that they do a reduction in rents?
We're not, we're asking them to work with them on that 70% and that would be enough for their,
So they're going to have 30% forgiven perhaps?
I'm not sure if it's forgiven or carried forward.
Okay. But anyway, I just think just for the clarification for the public, on that part of what we're doing, to have that set aside so we can really get an accounting of which, not individuals, right, Janet? We probably don't want to say individuals. There's a privacy issue. But as far as which landlords, are they just individual landlords? Are they going to be a big, like Lloyd Company landlords?
Absolutely. This is very accountable. So a spreadsheet is kept on every applicant and all of the identifying information, including the landlord specifically and the amount of money that is given to the landlord. So that is very transparent, and happy to provide that if whatever is needed for the city to make sure that we're spending those dollars wisely.
Thank you.
Other questions, councilors?
I think Jeff did you want to say something?
Thank you, Counselor. I'd like the council to remember that this is front-end applicant-driven, right? We don't choose what apartments they live in. We don't choose what rental or who the landlord is. They come to us because they have a crisis. You have 8 different agencies looking at this application up front. There's a couple that have 2 people. There are 10 individuals. Sioux Empire United Way, the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, the Outreach Center, the City of Sioux Falls. These are people that have worked with this population, work with housing, understand the needs of this community. They're case managing and looking at each and every one of these applications. So who gets it and where it ends up, that is all dependent on who applies. And we're not here to say that Lloyd should get this much and this guy should get that much. We're here to help people with this fund. And so we're agnostic and we're blind to that. We're looking at the needs of the family.
Before we go forward, can I get a motion to set the date for a second reading for Tuesday, April 7th?
So moved, Nitzert.
Second, Sale.
Okay, got a motion by Nitzert, seconded by Councilor Sale. And any further discussion? Councilor Nitzert.
Yeah, a couple more, since we're in gratitude mode, I want to make sure, I wanted to thank a few other people before it slipped my mind. One is Janet. She's been working a lot of hours. They're taking a lot of extra calls. She's at the EOC daily, I think, as part of this. And so big thanks to her and her staff. That's really important, I think, to recognize that. She's a great partner, and so is 211 in a lot of ways to this city. They provide us a lot of service, and it's not just in states of emergency. And the other thing is, I do want to thank the property management community out there, because I know that they are suffering too, and they're doing what they can to work with people, and many of them obviously have bills to pay as well, so if they don't have revenue coming in, they can't pay their bills, and so you have a cascading effect. And so everybody, I think, is trying to help everybody as much as they can, and I just wanted to reach out and say that. The other thing I wanted to also mention was, right after this was announced, our internal audit manager had a conversation with our internal auditor, and they both were discussing that it would be good to take a look at this after the fact, because we were, you're talking about a lot of money here, and so doing an audit later would be a very smart thing to do, because whenever you're talking about expending that much money and giving it to a third party to make sure that it went to the right place, it was spent wisely, the checks were in place, and all of those things. So I would be fully supportive of that, and that was already been a discussion. That would be a wonderful audit to add when we kind of get through this. So just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Okay. Any other? Councilor Sale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to commend those people in City Hall, the mayor and his team, and put this together in a short amount of time, and those in the community that have stepped forward to donate to this. This is what leadership is about. And I see the community coming together in all of the food drives and all of the teachers that are driving by the kids' houses. This is what Sioux Falls is about. This is what makes it great. to be able to take a phone call on a weekend to have an individual say that he's willing to donate a large sum of money to a project like this, it must have made all the sleepless nights worthwhile. And all the department heads and other people that have been involved with this in the community, I just have to say thank you for putting this together. This is what we should be concerned about. Public safety for our first issue tonight, and now keeping people in their houses in a time of crisis. And for all the charities that are out there and people being charitable to make sure these kids are fed during the day, I'd like to just personally say thank you for all of that happens. I fully intend to support this tonight and to continue to support these efforts as we go through these next, hopefully just weeks, maybe months of trying times. But we will get to the end of this in this fiscal year. We will see this heal and we will be better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any of the counselors on the phone yet have any comments, questions? Nobody? Okay, Counselor Neitzer.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the proposed ordinance by changing Section 4 to read, immediate effect. This ordinance is hereby declared necessary for the immediate preservation of the public health and shall become effective immediately upon its passage and publication pursuant to SDCL 9-19-13.
Second.
Okay, motion by Neitzer, seconded by Sale. Any further comment? If not, let's first do a vote on the amendment.
Council members Kiley,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley,
Yes.
Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
That passes 8-0. And we'll do a vote on the main motion.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, have it.
Easy.
Mr. Chair, yeah, we don't want a promotion yet. I have a couple of amendments that I just got printed out right before the meeting. Jim, if you want to toss this up and grab one for the clerk for me. I would move to amend by adding a new Section 3 to read as follows. The city shall have the right to audit the books and records in whatever form they may be kept, whether written, electronic, or other, of the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation relating or pertaining to the One Sioux Falls Fund, including any and all documents and other materials in whatever form they may be kept, which support or underlie those books and records kept by or under the control of the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, including but not limited to those kept in the Sioux Falls Community Foundation, its employees, agents, assigns, successors, and subcontractors. The Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation shall maintain such books and records together with such supporting or underlying documents and materials for the duration of this agreement and for at least 3 years following the completion of this agreement, including all renewals thereof. The books and records there together with the supporting or underlying documents and materials shall be made available upon request to the city through its employees, agents, representatives, contractors, or other designees during normal business hours at the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation's office or place of business in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This paragraph shall not be construed to limit, revoke, or abridge any other rights, powers, or obligations relating to audit which the city may have by state, city, or federal statute, ordinance, regulation, or agreement, whether those rights, powers, or obligations are expressed or implied. And then the existing sections 3 and 4 become section 4 and 5.
Second.
Okay, we have an amendment by Councilor Starr, seconded by Staley. Councilor Starr?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, this is the standard wording. I had staff pull this up from a number of other agreements that we use with other outside agencies, and then staff filled in the One Fund and the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation. Again, nothing that we don't normally add to these type of agreements. The agreement tonight, when we get to that later, will say, there's just a beginning clause, and then this is the rest of it that's normally put into these agreements. So what I'm doing is just being able to, or what we would be doing is having the ability to audit the fund, just like we were talking about a few minutes ago. Councilor Neitzer brought that up. I think Councilor Staley in her address, making sure that the money goes to the right places. So that's about as much legalese as I think I've ever read in my entire life. As part of this process, there isn't anything different than what we've used in other standard agreements.
Okay, do we have comments? Any, Councilor Sale?
I just like to get a input from the city attorney. Is this standard legal practice? I am not a practicing attorney, though I play, no, I'm not.
A couple thoughts to this. One is I haven't seen this legalese before, and so I do have a concern about it. There is a difference between this and other language you've used in the past. For example, it references auditing, as was discussed by Councilor Neitzer, the one Sioux Falls fund where and even Councilor Staley mentioned that there are funds involved in that are not city funds. So that would be an issue. Before getting into the substance on that, however, with the amendment that was brought and passed to pass this to a second reading, I believe amendments should wait until the second reading on the merits of the matter. As of right now, the vote is as to whether or not to pass this to second reading.
Any other comments, or did you get your questions answered?
I believe I did, and I have a follow-up question. So let me make sure I understand. If Pat Starr's amendment is deferred to the second reading, it still could be added to the agreement at that time?
Yes, although I would point out two things. One is, yes, amendments could be brought at second reading. But the other thing to bear in mind is this is a contract, and so when you get into the basics of a contract, you have offer, acceptance, counteroffer, and so if this contract is modified, for example, this is an amendment, a proposed amendment to the ordinance, but it's speaking to a contractual term that's addressed in the contract itself, and so what that could result in is, in effect, a counteroffer to the foundation as opposed to something that they'd be bound to. And a counteroffer in the law equates to a rejection and a new offer. And so the foundation thus would not be bound if this would be amended on the merits in that regard. And so that's something that the council would want to consider as well. And of course, you heard from Mr. Patterson, but, and so the fact that this is being brought and would change the terms of the contract, whether in ordinance or in the contract itself, I think that's something the council would need to be aware of. And of course, those merits can be discussed at second reading, but that's something that the council should be aware of because that would give the foundation the opportunity to look at it and say those are different terms than we agreed to. And so they wouldn't accept that, and that could impact, obviously, the intended goal one way or another. Because, yeah.
Thank you. So this will be my last and final question to the city attorney. I have heard from the people in the foundation and also from the outreach that's going to be distributing the money that we'll be able to audit the books and look at all the subjects. Councilor Starr wants to put that in writing so that we have that on our desk. How do we mend those two things together tonight and go forward?
That would be negotiated. I mean, that's part of the contract terms. That's what's been engaged in with the city, including my office. And so, you know, the basics of a contract are, you know, the offer and acceptance and a meeting of the minds, and this could change that. And so if there were concerns, they could be brought and we could negotiate those on behalf of the city. That being said, contractual negotiations are an administrative function. And so that would be part of the administration, and then the council could accept or reject, vote that up or down.
Mr.
we're
Mayor, do you
talking
have
in
a comment?
terms of a contract negotiation.
Yeah, just because I still have the gavel passed. The only thing this audit would show, because this was not shared with the administration beforehand, is that this money is all going to the community outreach. That's what the audit will show. So if we do want to audit where it's going, we're not auditing the right body with this amendment. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I'm saying we should take some time to craft it properly at second reading if there is in fact an audit that needs to be performed. So that would be my comment.
Okay, Councilor Neitzer?
I do support it in spirit, but as I was thinking about it, you have 2-on-1, or actually you have the Unmet Needs Committee, I guess, and 2-on-1 that's keeping a spreadsheet and essentially making quote-unquote awards, and they have documentation. And then you have the Community Foundation, which is really just the person who is taking in funds from donors and being kind of a fiduciary to hold them, and then they're giving them to this other entity who is the one who is actually cutting the check to the landlords. So you have all these different entities, and so I think this is a good idea in theory. It just needs to be maybe modified to do what we need to do. And the other thing that does get brought up is whenever you do contracts, the way in which we do it is we write a contract, the other party signs it, and then it comes to us to approve it because the mayor can't put the city signature on it until the council does. So you have a contract that's been signed by one party, and if you go modify it, then you have to start over again and go back to that party. I also, and maybe the city attorney's okay with this, I don't think this is probably the place to do this because this is not the approval of the contract, it's the approval of the supplemental here. So I'd be happy to do something like this if we could figure out how to craft language and make sure the other party is comfortable with it and can sign it. But on the other hand, I also want to make sure, is there a way that we could approve what we need to tonight so that we can get money moving at least to 250 tomorrow? So that's my question, I guess.
City Attorney, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I just, again, want to revisit there was an amendment to pass this to a second reading, okay? That's a procedural amendment that allowed it to go to second reading. The merits of an amendment on the merits is one that should be discussed at second reading. But I also want to reiterate that the administration negotiates contracts and the council can approve. I mean, within certain very narrow terms, they could modify, but anything of substance, when you're entering into a contract with a third party, is one where any substantive change is going to invalidate the contract. And we've got time to discuss that. And that's why the amendment, any amendment as to the merits, would be one that's addressed at second reading because the city can't bind someone on a counteroffer.
Do we have anybody on the phone that has any comments?
I do. This is Councilor Erickson.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. This is for Director Pritchard or Director Eckhoff or Stacy, whomever wants to answer it. Talk to me a little bit about the process in which this all came together. What were the conversations of why something like this was left out? And also what safeguards are currently in the contract as it's written right now. I've looked at that contract a little bit, and I just was reading through section 11 that says the organization shall provide the city with reasonable documentation of distribution of the grant funds upon request by the city. Is this something that would allow our internal auditor to go back and look at it after the fact? Or talk to me a little bit about how that would work.
I can address that one. As with a lot of things within the law and with city business, the administration through directors or directly negotiate contracts or discuss terms, but it's reduced to the writing by the lawyers, and the lawyers work out some of those details. And in this case, it was my office that worked with the foundation's attorney, Miles Schumacher, to come up with terms that were acceptable, and that's what's being presented tonight. It is section 11 of the contract that addresses the organization, the foundation's obligation to provide the city with reasonable documentation regarding the distribution of the funds. And again, those, as far as the parameters go, those negotiations were conducted with the recognition that the foundation is in many ways a pass-through for these funds, and so that's why this is the language that was mutually acceptable. If it's not acceptable to the council, then again, it can be voted up or down on second reading, not at first reading, when it comes to the merits of those terms. So at this point, that's how it happened. That's why this language was settled on. And if there are concerns or questions in the meantime, there's time to address that between the parties. But again, I would just emphasize that's an administrative function.
Anything else, Councilor
A
Erickson?
couple more follow-ups, if I can.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Hold on.
So
Excuse
my
me.
other,
Hold,
I just,
hold on. Was it that you, Councilor Erickson? I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
yes, I have two small follow-ups.
Go ahead.
One, well, I guess a follow-up and then a statement. So it's my understanding also, community outreach is audited each and every year. Is that true?
That I don't know.
They're a United Way agency, so they're subject to the same auditing that all United Way agencies are.
Okay. And truly, so that's, if that's the case, if they're audited every year, it's going to be included in that already the way it is. So I feel like the audit is already covered. If there's concerns with that. The other thing that I just want to express a little frustration is this is what happens when an amendment is brought forward at 7 o'clock. 7:01, an email comes across, which most of us are criticized oftentimes for not looking at our email, but I'm expected to quickly look at that. So I find that a little frustrating that even our city attorney had no idea this was coming forward. There was plenty of time between whenever this was brought forward. I don't think it was done in a nefarious way or anything, but I just question why the city attorney wasn't contacted through this time. So just my 2 cents. I won't be supporting it, obviously, because to be honest, I think that based on what was already said is we can't vote on an amendment on the first reading. So it's my guess this will have to be pulled. And if something comes forward next week, I think that it should be released right away and discussed with the city attorney along with the Development Foundation, making sure it's something that's going to work for everyone with their negotiation. Thank you.
Councilor,
You need to rule, point of order. Then you need to rule whether this amendment is in order or can go forward to be considered then. Because the city attorney just gave us advice that we shouldn't be making amendments on first reading from an amendment that was made at about 7:30 rather than 7:01. Not that we're arguing about what time amendments are made at the last minute.
I'm talking about the email that I got, Counselor. The email from you I didn't get until 7:01, so that's my point. But I would look to...
point of order. I think the chair has
attorney,
to make a ruling at this point before we go forward and continue
Councilor
to
Erickson,
discuss.
you may finish your point.
My point is we heard from the city attorney that this is not germane to it. You cannot make a motion at an amendment at this time. And so that's my point. I would like to hear from the city attorney.
Mr. City Attorney.
Again, the amendment that was brought pertained to passing this from first reading to second reading. That's a procedural amendment. We should not be discussing the merits of this action when the item up for consideration is whether this goes to second reading or not. So I would encourage the chair to proceed accordingly along within those parameters.
So just vote on
Thank
the
you.
amendment right
Point
now,
taken.
up or down? No. Okay. Any other comments before we vote on the amendment?
What amendment are we voting on? Councilor Starr's amendment?
Yes, we had a motion and a second.
All right, well, not to make this more confusing, but I'm going to submit that this amendment should not be on this item. This item is a supplemental appropriation. It just supplements a budget. It's not a contract. The amendment should be made on the next item. This item has 2 readings. The contract has 1 reading. Would be approved tonight. I think this is out of order to be at this agenda item.
Okay, so if we do not vote, how do we take it off the table?
Mr. Parliament.
It'd be easiest if Councilor Starr would withdraw his proposed amendment. Councilor Starr, the ball is back in your court.
Actually, it's still with the parliamentarian before you interrupt it.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend a vote on it because the motion was made and the question was stated, so.
All right, let's take a vote on it.
Council members Kiley,
No.
Neitzer,
No.
Selberg,
No.
Sale,
No.
Starr,
No.
Staley,
No.
Brecky,
No.
Erickson.
No.
Okay, so the amendment fails 8-0. So now we will go back to vote on the main motion. Do we have any other comments before we vote?
Mr. Chair.
Counselor Starr.
Thank you. Here's where I'm lost in this by making this from a first reading into a second reading, because our next agenda item is approving the contract that we're not going to approve the funding for till next week. So and we can't amend contracts because it's an either up or down vote. So the mayor pointed out very specifically that the money's going through a number of hands, so we don't have the authority to ask for the information to be able to do an audit. Because like he pointed out, if we do an audit of the community foundation, or the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, we're not going to get anything other than the money was given to community outreach through the Helpline Center and through some other places, who are also audited, but their audits are for the United Way and other things, so the taxpayers aren't going to get a copy of the audit. We're going to only be able to audit going back. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how we pass this without, and then coming back next week and trying to make amendments to a contract that we already approved. I mean, we're in a chicken or egg thing. I think we all agree that the money needs to go to help people in our community. I don't think there's any doubt with this group that that's where we want it to go. But I feel our job as a council is to make sure that there's a proper paper trail. We have the ability to go back and look. This doesn't turn into a safety report at Falls Park that we didn't have to begin with. So someplace we have to put things in order of how do we make sure that the taxpayers are funded? There's good people all the way along through this process, but every time there's good people along processes when things go bad.
Counselor Neitzer.
Can somebody tell me, would there be any possibility to delay the next item for 1 week? What would be the upsides and downsides? The contract, so that they're voted on the same night. Just so we can consider that.
I want to just quickly address what Pat had brought up in terms of the agreement following the appropriation. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Section 6 of the agreement, is essentially if you didn't move the appropriation forward next week, the $250,000 that we already have budget authority for would be allowed through this agreement, and the agreement would automatically collapse down to that amount. That's the way the agreement was written, is that it cannot exceed the budget authority or the appropriation or the appropriation. So for example, if you didn't move forward on second reading of the ordinance, it would essentially become a $250,000 agreement instead of $1 million agreement, if that makes sense. So that's why we made the request to move it forward this evening, so that we could move forward with the original $250,000 and be able to vest those funds so that it could be distributed, because the more we do, as Janet noted, the more we do talk about the fund, that does increase the importance of it, and I think we'll continue to see strong demand in addition to what they've had already. Again, we do have, our agreement is between us and the Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation. The language that we have in Section 11 does, in large part, many of the things you're attempting to do there. It does allow us access to their records. This is one small fund within many vast funds. The Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation is obviously an audited entity. They have an annual audit done by a third-party auditor, just as the city of Sioux Falls does. We would have access to the records to see how they disperse the money through that. We have, I believe, existing agreements with the Helpline Center. We support them. I would assume we also have auditing provisions as part of those agreements, so we have access through those existing agreements with the Helpline Center as well. And so there is a trail of documentation that we can go through as part of that.
Counselor Neitzer, I believe, had the question.
So turning around what you said, I think what I'm understanding, if I'm thinking of this procedurally, if we pass this to a second reading and we approve the contract tonight, the contract tonight automatically would be capped at $250,000, because that's the only amount that has been appropriated so far, and that was in the budget that we approved, which is being repurposed.
Using existing budget authority, so it limits the amount, and it says if It essentially says if the additional 750 is not approved next week, it automatically draws down that, and we're not obligated over and above the 250,000 that we've allocated budget-wise to this.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Sale.
I'm just a little frustrated sitting over here. I think we're trying to get money in the hands to keep people in their houses, in their apartments. Let's not get off on all of these technical, we want to make sure the books are done. Do you think these fine people here tonight are going to let something like this ruin their reputation and ruin their career? No, they're not. Let's push this thing forward, and if there's a mess to clean up 6 months from now, we're going to have huge messes to clean up. They will show us the books. And if they don't show us the books, they're not going to do business with us anymore. They're certainly not going to do business with the people that are going to donate $2 million to this outside of that. If the Sioux Falls Community Foundation cannot be trusted with the money, why did they grow to the size that they're at? And why are we giving people assistance that need it? Let's get this done. Let's get the money so these people can stay in their houses. And if there's procedural things to do later, let's do that later.
Councilor Staley.
Well, first of all, we're not talking about keeping people in their houses here. We're talking about keeping people in their apartments, rentals. Councilor Sale, I don't have a problem sitting here on my birthday, by the way, discussing this and vetting it out. I will recall 2 years ago when we were told the same thing when we were talking about a downtown parking ramp, room filled with people saying we shouldn't go forward, and we're being told, oh, it's a great, push it forward, don't ask questions, we'll talk about it later. What we're doing here is we're just making sure that everything is as it should be for our people. None of us want to see anyone hurting here. We're all in this together. But to ask a few questions and ask for some clarification to make sure everything is handled as it should be is a good thing. So we all need to be patient here. And let's remember that our legislature was convening last night until this morning until 3:45 a.m. I watched it until 1:30 last night. And I'm watching them. They took about an hour and a half to talk about an amendment at 1:30 in the morning. And I thought, wow, you know, we sit here sometimes till 10:30 or 9 o'clock or whatever, and now it's 8:30. But the citizens expect us to sit here as long as it takes to get the job done. So patiently saying thank you for all your efforts to help get people the assistance that they need. But if we need to ask a few extra questions, I think that that's a good thing. So don't take offense. We're not trying to say you're crooks. We're just saying, yes, thank you, Janet, for that beautiful smile. We're just trying to say that we want to make sure everything is as it should be.
Any of the councilors on the phone have anything left to say?
Yes, Councilor Selbert.
Go ahead, Councilor Kiley.
I find this whole discussion very frustrating considering what's at stake. We've already been told that the data is accessible. I'm not certain how we would be able to audit only the city's share of potentially millions of dollars that will go to this very worthy effort. I can't help but think this is all brought up because Councilor Starr has a very select special interest group of supporters that has an unfounded distrust of the Sioux Falls Community Foundation. So that is greatly impacting this very worthy effort, and I would urge my councilors to move forward. Thank you.
Any other councilors on the phone have any comments?
The only comment that I would share that I take great offense to is the fact that an apartment isn't a home. I think that's a very, very naive statement to state. Apartment living for some, they choose to, some don't. Some choose to live in trailer parks, some choose to live in a house with a big yard or maybe not want all that maintenance. Apartment living is a home. And I'm quite embarrassed if we're going to look at somebody who lives in an apartment and say, oh, well, you don't matter because you live in an apartment. This is real for everyone. This is very serious for a lot of people that have that fear of losing their home, their space, where they reside. They have children. They don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And there's been so many amazing, generous people in this community filling in some extra voids. And so I just hope that we can support this. For me, I feel like per those few sections that were talked about in that section 11, as well as many other places, we've got that safeguard in. And so for me, I will be supporting this.
Counselor Neitzer.
I do appreciate that we also have the 2-on-1 contract already so we can audit them, and they're the ones making the decisions about the disbursements. And Counselor Erickson stole my thunder. I think thousands and thousands of people were insulted tonight by being told that they don't matter. It was a horrible, horrible comment. It was awful.
Anybody
Mr.
else?
Chair?
Counselor Staley.
Yeah, let me clarify. First of all, for people to be throwing around insults to their colleagues, that's something that needs to be addressed. And what I was let me clarify that I was talking about homes meaning houses. This is not addressing a mortgage situation. Counselor Neitzer, we're not talking about mortgages here, right, Janet? We're talking about people in rentals. That's what I was referring to. Now, Janet, would you come up? I just want to ask for clarification. So I absolutely, to say that I was insulting people in that way, Counselor Neitzer, absolutely out of line.
Was there?
Would this be applicable to someone in a house?
If it's for rent, the fund is to pay for a rent, and a person could be renting a house. So theoretically, it could be a house.
Okay, so I stand correct. I was thinking that this was going to be more applied to apartments.
Sure, people in Sioux Falls rent apartments traditionally in an apartment building, but there also is a lot of houses that are subdivided and then rented out. So it could apply for that too.
But it could be a single-family dwelling as well.
Sure, yep, individual can rent a house too, absolutely.
And thank you. And then I would, Counselor Erickson, Kylie, when you are talking about Counselor Starr, could you clarify on what you're talking about, that he's somehow off base on what he's doing, bringing forth an amendment?
I'll finish up your questions and comments, then we'll go to him if we could. We need to wrap this up. Do you have more comments?
Yeah, my comment was to Counselor.
Are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Counselor Kiley? Did you have a
No
response
further
or a
comment.
Okay.
Call for the question.
Let's go for a vote here.
Council members Kiley,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Yes.
Bailey,
Yes.
Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
That passes 8-0. On to item number 7, I believe.
Yeah, we'll move on to item 37, actually, which is pulled from our contracts, and we'll move on to that item.
The item is item 37 from Contracts and Agreements, Planning and Development, Housing, provide assistance for unmet needs related to the COVID-19 pandemic, Sioux Falls Area Community Foundation, in the amount of $1 million.
Jeff, you just want to address the second part of this then, please?
Kleenex up here.
I know, sorry.
Thank you. All right, the contract was in, I'll just walk through it very quickly. Again, it was a negotiation between the Community Foundation trying to get funds out. They're not charging a fee for that, and so we worked, our city attorney worked with their attorney to get to where we are today. As Sean mentioned, it's an aggregate amount of up to $1 million. It's based on the appropriations that are there, and the funds would be dispersed in increments of $200,000 at a time upon request. And that, of course, follows well with the first $250,000 that would go into the fund. It talks about the distributions coming, allowing from other private sector, talks about the role of the Unmet Needs Committee, has some boilerplate language about discrimination, compliance with federal laws, that type of thing. Section 6 talks about the budget items. Sean covered that. Section 8 indemnifies the city. It talks about termination and notice. And then Section 11 talks about reasonable documentation of distribution of the grant funds upon request by the city. And again, the role of the community foundation is to disperse the money on request to community outreach, which would be doing the individual disbursements to the landlords and the property owners. And so if you were to audit this fund, what you would see are distributions to community outreach in increments of whatever they would be at that particular time. And then the rest is just the stuff that you'll see at the end of any of the contracts in the signature page. So it's a pretty straightforward. Again, it was built to be efficient. It was built to get the money out to the folks. It was built to build a partnership between the different entities. I'd take any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Anyone from the public like to speak on that one tonight? Okay, counselors, do you have any questions for any of the folks here that are dealing with this item tonight? All right, is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second, Brecky.
All right, motion approved by Selberg, seconded by Brecky. Discussion, council. Seeing none, let's take a vote, please.
Council members Kiley,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley,
Yes.
Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
All right, that passes 8-0. We'll move on to item 7.
Item 7, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, authorizing interim revisions to Chapter 57 of the Code of Ordinances of Sioux Falls pertaining to the novel coronavirus COVID-19. This ordinance shall become effective upon one reading and adoption pursuant to Section 33.027 of the Code of Ordinances of Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Hello, Mark.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This action tonight, with your support, would authorize a temporary change in the Garbage and Recycling Ordinance, Chapter 57. Just give me a couple minutes to frame this up for you. So, solid waste industry contacted Public Works last week to discuss options for solid waste collection with the expected reduced staff due to COVID-19. The industry advanced the idea of allowing curbside collection from an efficiency standpoint. The current ordinance does not allow garbage to be placed curbside. Industry estimates that there'd be a 40% reduction in the time at each stop where containers are placed curbside. This time saving would allow for the same service even with reduced workforce. The industry worked together, led by Mike Hurst with Novak Sanitation, to formally submit a letter for this evaluation. I do have a statement from him to read to just try to recognize social distancing that we'll wrap with. Just to give you some additional background, we have 18 garbage haulers licensed for disposal at the landfill. 13 of those haulers operate in the City of Sioux Falls. We asked for how many of them would be in favor of this change. All responded, 12 are in favor, 1 was opposed. The one that was opposed reached out and said their concern was litter and blocking of sidewalks, where we already have ordinances that address both litter and blocked sidewalks. We also received a letter of support from the recycling industry supporting this curbside placement. Our approach to enact this with your support was to change an ordinance with an ordinance. Change can be made with one reading due to the emergency declaration that's related to COVID-19. Ordinance change allows for curbside pickup of garbage, recycling, and yard waste. The duration would be for the length of the COVID-19 emergency declaration unless extended or repealed by the council. We then also consulted with the Solid Waste Planning Board. Solid Waste Planning Board is one of the larger boards of the city. It's a 15-member board. We reached out to them via email, and all were in favor that responded. We had 11 out of 15 respond, and so we had really good support. All that responded were in favor of this change. We did discuss it with code enforcement. If we have code enforcement items, if the cans are not retrieved and put back in their inconspicuous spot after the day of pickup, it would be a code enforcement action. All right, then just to wrap up, we did ask Mike Herbst with the industry to provide you a statement, again, just to recognize the impacts of COVID-19, not ask him to come to council if at all possible. So this is from Mike Herbst. Good evening, council members and Mayor Tenhaken. As many industries are, the hauling industry is also feeling the effects of the coronavirus. So far, the largest impact we are seeing is workforce issues. The workforce shortage will continue to get worse before it gets better. With the number of citizens affected by closures, quarantines, etc., we need to find efficiencies where possible to continue to provide this essential service to our community. 35 to 40% of the garbage and recycling residential hauler labor is time spent walking up and down driveways to retrieve and return carts to homes. By allowing carts to be placed curbside on the day of service, the hauling community will be able to continue to provide necessary services and to meet commitments to our community, even with decreased frontline labor force. Thank you for considering a temporary modification to the ordinance to allow for curbside container placement. If you have any questions, we're here to answer them.
Appreciate it, Mark. Anyone from the public who would like to speak to this item? All right, councilors, do you have any questions for Mark on this?
Just a comment. After I saw that this had been added, I did call my garbage hauler, and I learned that they, even before this COVID thing hit, that they are having a hard time keeping their operations staffed. So they were grateful for this. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you.
Councilor Neitzer?
I would like to make a motion to set a date of second reading for Tuesday, April 7th, 2020.
Second, Kylie.
All right, motion by Neitzer on that, seconded by Kylie. Discussion on that, Councilor Neitzer?
I would like to also make a second motion, if I could.
You bet.
And that will be to motion to amend the proposed by changing section 4 to read immediate effect. This ordinance is hereby declared necessary for the immediate preservation of the public health and shall become effective immediately upon passage and publication pursuant to SDCL 9-19-13.
Second.
Second, Kylie.
All right, motion on that amendment by Neitzer, seconded by Selberg on that. Any discussion on that? Okay, we'll take a vote on that, please.
Council members Kylie,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley,
Yes.
Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
All right, the amendment passes 8-0, so we're back to the amended motion. Discussion on that, council. All right, seeing none, let's take a vote on that, please.
Council members Kylie,
Yes.
Neitzer,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley,
Yes.
Brecky, Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
that passes 8-0. Councilors, any new business tonight?
Move to adjourn, Star.
All right, motion adjourned by Starr.
Second.
Seconded by Neitzer. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
All those opposed?
Yes.
Have a good night, you guys. Thank you.